I never thought I'd hear that name again at my own dinner table. Thanksgiving in our house was supposed to be predictable. My mother-in-law critiquing the stuffing, my son sneaking rolls before grace, my daughter asking if she could skip the green beans one more year. 14 years of marriage had taught me exactly what to expect from this holiday, and I welcomed the routine of it. Routine, after everything I'd seen in courtrooms all week, felt like peace. So when my wife walked into the dining room holding a fourth-place setting I hadn't asked for, I assumed we'd invited a neighbor, or maybe one of my son's teachers who had nowhere else to go. I smiled. I even offered to grab another folding chair from the garage. Then the doorbell rang, and my wife looked at me in a way she had never looked at me before. Steady, apologetic, and afraid all at once. "Before you say anything," she said quietly, "just know I had a reason." I opened that door, already bracing for something small. A misunderstanding. A mix-up with the caterer, maybe. I was not prepared for the woman standing on my porch in the cold November air, holding a bottle of wine like a peace offering, wearing an expression I hadn't seen in almost 15 years. The woman I almost married. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Nathan Whitaker. I'm 37 years old, a corporate and family attorney. And until that Thursday in November, I believed my marriage to my wife was the one part of my life that held no secrets left to uncover. Standing on my porch that evening was Sasha Alvarez, a woman I had once planned to spend the rest of my life with, before a broken engagement sent both of us down entirely different roads. I hadn't spoken to her in almost a decade. I hadn't wanted to. So 3 questions consumed me before I even stepped back to let her inside. Why would my wife, a woman who had every reason to resent Sasha's existence, go out of her way to invite her into our home? What could possibly connect a forensic accountant I hadn't seen in 15 years to a holiday dinner with my children present? And why did my wife look less like a woman confessing an affair and more like a woman protecting me from something she was afraid to say out loud? I would spend the rest of that night and the weeks that followed finding out that the answer had nothing to do with romance at all, and everything to do with a debt from my past that was about to come due at my own firm. To understand why Sasha Alvarez showing up at my Thanksgiving table felt like a small earthquake, you have to understand who I was before I became the man sitting at the head of that table. At 24, I was a second-year associate at a mid-sized firm, grinding through billable hours and telling myself the exhaustion was temporary. Sasha was a junior forensic accountant, 2 floors up, sharp enough to catch discrepancies most people missed, and stubborn enough to say so out loud, even when it wasn't convenient for anyone above her. We were engaged within 18 months. I thought I knew exactly what my life was going to look like. Then, 3 months before our wedding, Sasha ended it. No explanation that made sense to me at the time, just a quiet, resolute statement that she couldn't stay at that firm or in that city and be honest with herself. She left the state within a year. I never got a straight answer, and eventually I stopped asking. 2 years later, I met my wife. She has never made me feel like a man carrying someone else's shadow. She's steady in a way I've always admired, the kind of woman who reads a room before she reacts to it. When I finally told her, early in our relationship, that I'd once been engaged to a woman who left without explanation, she didn't flinch. She just nodded and said, "People leave when staying costs them something they can't afford. Someday you might understand what that cost her." I never thought much of that comment again, until this Thanksgiving. What I hadn't told my wife, because I genuinely didn't remember it as significant, was that the senior partner who built my firm, and who still, to this day, oversees a chunk of my caseload, had been Sasha's direct supervisor back then. I'd always assumed her sudden departure from the firm and our engagement were separate decisions that simply happened to collide. I had never once considered they were the same decision. My mother-in-law is a woman who has never fully warmed to me. Not in 14 years, not through 2 grandchildren, not through every holiday I've hosted in her honor. She lost her husband 6 years ago, and what he left behind, a modest but carefully built family trust meant to fund my children's education, has been managed by my firm ever since. As a professional courtesy, I insisted on personally overseeing. I want to be honest, I was proud of that. I thought handling that trust myself was the one unimpeachable thing I could offer my mother-in-law. Proof that despite everything she thought of me, her grandchildren's future was safe in my hands. I had no idea, walking into that Thanksgiving, that the safety of that trust was the entire reason my wife had spent the last 6 weeks secretly meeting with my ex-fiancée behind my back. Sasha sat across from me at my own dinner table, and for the first 10 minutes, nobody said anything true. My wife made introductions so smooth they almost worked. "This is Sasha, an old friend from Nathan's early career days," she said, and my mother-in-law, who has an instinct for tension the way some people have an instinct for weather, narrowed her eyes just slightly and said nothing at all, which somehow felt worse than if she'd said something. My son, 10 years old and blissfully unaware that adults perform normalcy the way actors perform lines, asked Sasha if she liked football. My daughter, 7, wanted to know if she'd ever met anyone famous. Sasha answered both with an ease that told me she'd been coached, gently, on how to survive this dinner without setting off an explosion. I played along because I didn't know what else to do. I passed the potatoes. I laughed at my father-in-law's old joke that my mother-in-law still tells every year like a ritual. And underneath all of it, I watched my wife and Sasha exchange exactly 2 glances across the table. Quick, coordinated, the kind of look people share when they've already had the hard conversation somewhere else, and are simply waiting for the right moment to include the last person in the room. That moment came after dessert, when my mother-in-law excused herself to help my daughter with a puzzle in the living room, and the kids drifted off, restless with pie and permission to watch television. It was just the 3 of us at the table. "Nathan," my wife said, and her voice had dropped the performance entirely. "Sasha didn't come here to relive the past. She came because of something she found 6 years ago and was too frightened to report. And something I found 3 months ago that made her willing to finally say it out loud." I felt my stomach drop, the way it does in a courtroom, right before opposing counsel produces the one document you didn't know existed. "Found what?" I asked. "Found where?" Sasha folded her hands on the table, the same steady, careful gesture I remembered from 15 years ago, right before she used to deliver bad audit news to partners twice her age. "In the year before I left the firm," she said, "I flagged an irregularity in a set of trust disbursements. Small, at first, numbers that didn't reconcile the way they should have. I brought it to my supervisor because that was protocol. The senior partner," I said. It wasn't a question. "The senior partner," she confirmed. "He told me I'd misread the ledger." Then, within 2 months, my caseload was quietly reassigned. My performance reviews changed tone overnight, and I was given a choice: resign quietly with a clean reference, or stay and watch my career get dismantled piece by piece until I did it myself. I chose to leave. I told you I couldn't stay at that firm and be honest with myself, and that was true. I just never told you the rest of the sentence. Why now? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Why come back after 15 years? My wife answered before Sasha could. Because 3 months ago, I found something in your home office that made me reach out to her directly. A printed disbursement summary for your father-in-law's trust, the one you manage personally, with the exact same kind of irregularity Sasha described from 15 years ago. Numbers that don't reconcile, and the senior partner's initials on the authorization line. The room went silent enough that I could hear the television in the next room playing something my daughter had chosen. You've been investigating my own firm, I said slowly, behind my back, with a woman I used to be engaged to, for 3 months, and you didn't tell me. I didn't know how to tell you, my wife said, and for the first time that night, her composure cracked. I didn't know if you were involved, Nathan. I needed to know before I brought this to you. I needed to know I wasn't about to destroy my own husband's career over a misunderstanding, or worse, that I wasn't protecting one by staying quiet. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my home office at 2 in the morning with the same disbursement summary my wife had found, staring at numbers I had personally signed off on 18 months earlier without ever running them against the underlying account activity myself, because I trusted my firm's compliance team to do that work, the same way every managing partner at every firm trusts the layer beneath them. That trust, I was about to learn, had been the entire design of the scheme. By Monday morning, I'd asked a junior associate at my firm, sharp and quietly loyal in a way that made him easy to overlook and easy to underestimate, to pull 5 years of disbursement records for my father-in-law's trust without telling him why. If you'd like to help others recognize a story like this one, this is a good moment to hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people find these stories. He came back to me 2 days later, looking like a man who'd found something he wished he hadn't. There's a pattern, he said, sliding a folder across my desk. Small transfers, always under the threshold that triggers a secondary compliance review, always routed through a shell administrative account before reaching the final destination. It's been happening for 6 years, since right around the time the trust was established. Since right around the time my father-in-law passed away. Since right around the time I proudly told my mother-in-law I would personally oversee her family's future. I confronted the senior partner the following week, in his office, with the door closed. I expected denial. I expected outrage. What I got instead was something colder. A man who had spent 30 years building a reputation, calmly explaining that the administrative reallocations, as he called them, were a temporary bridge loan structure he'd used across several client trusts to manage the firm's own cash flow during a lean period years ago, always intending to reconcile the balances quietly before anyone noticed. Always intending to, I repeated. You fired a 24-year-old for finding this. You didn't intend to fix anything. You intended to bury it. I protected this firm, he said. The same firm that made you what you are today, Nathan. Think very carefully about which side of this you want to be standing on. That threat, I realized later, was the moment the case stopped being about numbers and became about power. His power over my career, over my family's reputation, over a decision he assumed I'd make out of self-preservation. My mother-in-law found out 4 days later. My wife made the decision that her mother deserved the truth before it reached anyone else, and I sat across from my mother-in-law in her kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd once told me I'd never be good enough for her daughter, and watched her hands shake as she absorbed the fact that the man managing her late husband's legacy for their grandchildren had, at minimum, failed to catch 6 years of quiet theft under his own roof. I trusted you with this, she said, and for the first time in 14 years, There was no edge in her voice at all, just grief. I trusted you specifically because I didn't trust him. That sentence undid me more than any accusation ever could have. Sasha, meanwhile, had quietly begun rebuilding the case she'd been too afraid to finish 15 years earlier. This time with current records, current signatures, and a corroborating witness who had no history with the senior partner to protect, and nothing to lose by speaking plainly. If this story is resonating with you, go ahead and drop a comment telling me what you would have done in my position. I read every single one. There was a version of this where I quietly negotiated a private restitution agreement, made my mother-in-law whole, and let the senior partner retire with his name intact, the way firms so often do. Sasha made it very clear, gently but firmly, that she had already lived through the cost of that kind of silence once, and she would not help me build a second one. I'm not doing this to punish him, she told me, the week before we filed the formal complaint. I'm doing this because the version of me who stayed quiet at 24 never got her name cleared. Every audit record from that year still shows I misread the ledger. I need that corrected, Nathan, on paper, permanently, and I think you need the same thing for your children's trust. The State Bar's disciplinary committee doesn't move the way courtroom dramas suggest. There was no dramatic gavel, no shouted objection. There was a conference room, 3 attorneys from the ethics committee, a compliance officer reviewing 6 years of financial records with the flat, unhurried patience of someone who has seen every version of this story before, and the senior partner sitting very still in a chair that suddenly looked too large for him. The twist wasn't that he had taken the money. By that point, the paper trail we'd assembled made that undeniable. The twist was buried in an internal memo the committee uncovered from 15 years earlier, one that had never made it into Sasha's personnel file at all. It was a memo he had written to the firm's founding partner at the time, explicitly recommending Sasha's quiet removal before her audit findings could be escalated. Not because her numbers were wrong, but because, in his own written words, she was too early in her career to survive being right about someone senior. He hadn't just committed the original theft. He had documented, in his own handwriting, the exact moment he chose to protect himself by destroying a 24-year-old's career rather than correct his own mistake. The same 24-year-old who happened to be engaged to the associate 2 floors down at the time. Sasha read that memo out loud in that conference room, and her voice didn't shake once. "You didn't just steal from a family," she said. "You built a system where the only people capable of catching you were the ones you could most easily discredit. I left this state because I believed you. I believed I'd misread the numbers. It took me 15 years and someone else's family trust to find out I never had." I watched something in his face give way for the first time since I'd known him. Not guilt exactly, but the specific exhaustion of a man who has finally run out of rooms to control. The committee's findings weren't sealed, and they weren't quiet. His license was suspended pending a full restitution order. My father-in-law's trust was made whole with interest through the firm's malpractice coverage, and Sasha's original personnel record was formally corrected, 15 years late, but corrected, with a written acknowledgement that her original audit finding had been accurate and improperly suppressed. My wife sat beside me through every hour of that hearing. When it was over, she reached over and took my hand, and I finally understood the full shape of what she'd done. She hadn't investigated my firm because she doubted me. She had spent 3 months quietly building an airtight case with a woman she had every reason to resent, specifically so that when I finally learned the truth, I wouldn't be the one standing alone and unprepared in that conference room. I'd be standing there with proof, and with an ally instead of a stranger. "I didn't invite her to Thanksgiving to test you," my wife said quietly, in the hallway outside the hearing room. "I invited her because I needed you to hear this from someone who lived it, not from a stack of documents I handed you cold. I needed you to see her as a person again before you saw her as a witness." The final piece of this story didn't come from the hearing room. It came 3 weeks later, in my mother-in-law's kitchen again, on an ordinary Sunday afternoon, with my son doing homework at the counter and my daughter narrating an elaborate imaginary game to nobody in particular. My mother-in-law handed me an envelope she said she'd been carrying around for a week, unsure whether to give it to me at all. Inside was a short, handwritten letter, one she'd apparently started and abandoned several times, judging by the crossed-out lines. She had written, in part, that she'd spent 6 years quietly testing me, watching for the moment I would fail her the way she assumed every man eventually failed the people who trusted him. She admitted she had never told me that her late husband, before he passed, had specifically asked her not to let his own former business partner anywhere near his estate, a business partner he'd known for decades and never fully trusted, even while working with him. My mother-in-law had assumed, wrongly, that hiring my firm meant hiring his judgment along with mine. She'd spent years bracing for a betrayal she thought was inevitable, and instead, she wrote, she'd watched her son-in-law personally uncover the exact threat her husband had warned her about, at real professional cost to himself. "I owe you an apology. I should have given you the day you married my daughter," she said, when I looked up from the letter. "I was so afraid of losing what my husband built that I couldn't see you were the one protecting it the whole time." It wasn't a courtroom victory that closed this chapter of my life. It was that letter, and the quiet, unglamorous work of rebuilding trust with a woman who had spent 14 years believing I would eventually disappoint her. Sasha and I spoke one final time before she returned home, this time without my wife in the room, by her own suggestion. There was no unfinished romantic tension to resolve, just two people who had once meant to build a life together, closing a door that had been left open, unintentionally, for 15 years. "I used to think leaving you was the worst decision I ever made," she told me. "Now I think it was the only decision that could have eventually protected your family. I just wish it hadn't taken this long, or cost either of us this much, to matter." We shook hands in my driveway like colleagues, not like people saying goodbye to a past that still ached. And in a strange way, that handshake felt more honest than anything either of us had said 15 years earlier. My wife and I still argue, occasionally, about whether she should have told me sooner. I think she should have. She still believes that if she had, I would have tried to protect the senior partner out of institutional loyalty before I had proof strong enough to protect my mother-in-law's trust instead. I'm not sure which of us is right. What I do know is that my wife spent 3 months building a case for my family's protection with a woman she had every reason to distrust, and she did it without once making me the villain of that story. If there's one thing I carry forward from that Thanksgiving table, it's this. The people who trust us most rarely announce their doubts out loud. They quietly build the case for us instead, and hope we're worthy of what they find. I've told a lot of stories about my family over the years, but this one stays with me differently than most, because it wasn't really about betrayal at all, not from the people I loved anyway. It was about how far the people who love you will quietly go to protect you from something you haven't even seen coming yet. I still think about that letter more than I think about that disciplinary hearing. Vindication feels good for about a week. Being finally understood by someone who spent 14 years doubting you feels good for a lifetime. If this story meant something to you, I'd genuinely love to hear your take on it. Do you think my wife made the right call keeping this from me for 3 months while she and Sasha built the case? Or do you think I deserve to know from the very first day she found that disbursement summary in my office? Leave a comment and tell me honestly. I read every one of them. And some of your perspectives on past episodes have honestly changed the way I look back on my own choices. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because my family and I have a lot more of these standalone stories to share, and you never know which ordinary Thursday dinner is about to turn into the next one. If this episode hit close to home, share it with someone in your life who'd understand exactly why a single dinner invitation can carry 15 years of unfinished truth behind it. They'll thank you for it. And do give this video a like before you go. It genuinely helps stories like ours reach the people who need to hear them. Last thing, and I always love this part, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching this from tonight. I've heard from viewers on nearly every continent telling me these stories somehow still feel like their own family's kitchen table, and I never get tired of reading that. Thank you for sitting at this table with us one more time. I'll see you in the next one.